So we're going to be looking tonight at Yosef's, call it a battle test with Eshes Potiphar, and we'll see how it connects to Chanukah. And tonight we're going to be drawing a lot from the Balei Musar, okay? And I'll just mention a little editorial. There's this strange misunderstanding out there as if Musar and Hasidus were two opposing teams. That was never so. Right, they work together on many projects, different times. Hasidim will kind of, say in a little whisper, Musar was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's way to get a lot of Hasidic ideas into that world or something. I know a member of the Twersky family from Milwaukee, so he said his grandmother, the old Baba Rebbetzin Twersky, said, Musar, she said, leave it to the Litvaks to take common sense and make a movement out of it. She says, of course you have to, behave Musar. But again, there was much to it, and Rabbi Yisrael Salanter made a huge revolution. So we're going to try to take a look. Also, Musar has got this bad connotation in the mind that it means somebody's yelling at you about how bad you are. American kids in school almost turn it into a verb. Oh, I got taken to the principal and he Musared me. Right? It's not meant to be a baseball bat that hits a person. It's a whole form of avodah. Okay, so here there's a beautiful medrash, a puzzling medrash. When Yosef has this struggle with the test with Eshes Potiphar, and we shouldn't minimize this test. Again, the Midrashim go into the many different things that she did, and again, the more mystical Svarim say that the klipa of Mitzrayim, so to speak, the negative spiritual power of Mitzrayim was imbued in Eshes Potiphar. And this was a tremendous battle. So the Medrash Rabbah adds in parts of the dialogue that he had with her that we don't see in the Psukim. Right? It says, Vayemoin, Vayomer el Eshes Adonov, what we have in the Pasuk, he refused. He said to the wife of his master, Hein Adoni lo yidea iti ma babois. Right? My master is like giving me free reign. He's not looking over my shoulder at what happens in the house. Right? How can I do this terrible thing? Now, the Medrash adds in the following. Vayemoin vayomer hein adoni. Amar lo, he said to Eshes Potiphar, Lamud hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu lios bocher me'ahuve beis abo lo'ola. He says, excuse me, Mrs. Potiphar, right, I would just like to mention, right, he says to her, I would like to mention that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has sometimes chosen from my family, from Beis Abba, one of my ancestors to be a Korban Olah, my grandfather Yitzchak, right? So therefore, right, Esh Malech, if I'm going to listen to you, Shema Ebocher La'olah ve'Aposel min HaKorban, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu would want to choose me to be a Korban Olah, and if I do what you want, I would be posel as a Korban. Davar Acher, another thing he told her, Vayomer Eshes Adonov, he says, Lamud HaKadosh Baruch Hu lios nigle elahuve beis Abba balayla. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to those who he loves from my family at night, right? It says, Achar advarim ha'ela ha'advar Hashem al Avram b'machzeh. Hashem spoke to Avram with a vision in the night. Yitzchak, Vayero Elov Hashem b'layla ahu. Right? He appeared to Yitzchak in that night. Yaakov, Vayachalom v'nei Sulam. Yaakov had the vision of the Sulam. Esh Malech, he says, if I would listen to you, V'shema yiglei lai HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu will want to reveal himself to me. V'yimtzosi tomei, and he'll find that I'm tomei. So therefore I can't do this. So I found this it's a book of different Perushim especially from the Balei Musar on the Mesilas Yesharim. And the Mesilas Yesharim uses this phrase, he says, that the Yetzer Hara that we have to deal with, he says, is a ish milchama u'melumad ba'armimus. He says the Yetzer Hara he's a warrior, and he is so knowledgeable with tricks. Right? So the question is, the person says, how am I supposed to battle against the Yetzer Hara? Right? It's like me having to fight with what they call a ninja or something. This person has learned 50 ways to kill a person with a teaspoon. Right? So how am I supposed to fight against him? So the Yetzer Hara has had thousands of years of experience, has tremendous powers. How am I, little shnuk me, supposed to be able to escape from him? It says two things. Chochma Rabba v'hashkafa gedola. So Chochma Rabba right, is the wisdom that we have access to. Meaning, the wisdom that I have is not just what's in here. I have access to all the Torah of all the generations. And when I look into the Torah, with each Yetzer Hara that comes in each generation, each situation, the tools to defeat him are there. Hashkafa Gedola is the following. So there was a Rav, his name was Rav Meir Robman. He was a Talmud of Lomje and then of Kelm. Okay, one of the K's. He was a Talmud of Kelm, and later he was a Rav in a town, Vilkomir, in Lita, and then he came to Eretz Yisrael, where he started actually 2 yeshivas in Haifa, and he was a very active Rav in Haifa. So they brought from his shmuzim, his talk, his teachings, and he said like this. He says, we have to understand this medrash. If Yosef is talking to Eshes Potiphar, right, this is some Egyptian lady who was obviously not of the highest moral character. What in the world is he talking to her about? He's saying, listen, Potiphar, you know what a korban olah is. Korban olah, Tomim LaHashem, says, my Zedi, the Heilige Zedi, Yitzchak Avinu, is chosen to be an olah. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would choose me to be an olah, so after I'd be apostle. Who are you talking to? You're talking to this Egyptian, whatever word you want to use for a woman of such low morals. Exactly. What a prosta lady. What are you going to... You're telling her these things.
She was a princess. Wasn't she descendant of prince or king?
I don't know. It could be.
It doesn't have morality.
Correct.
No, I appreciate it.
In other words, the Parazan. Right. Nobody that we see in Chumash was simple. Okay. And in fact, there's a whole other interesting track about this. Again, let's remember that it says that Yosef married, right, Osnat bat Potiphera, right, that she had told him, another medrash which says, she says, look in the stars, it says that I'm supposed to have your child, right? And it was really the daughter. So in other words, she was not just coming out of this at Stam Taiva, she was telling him that this is the way it must be, right? This is something that's supposed to happen in the world. So he explains like this, and to say Nevuah, he says, Ms. Potiphar, do you know what it means to be a Novi? Right, to have Nevuah? I don't want to miss that. Why doesn't he talk to her like a person talks to her? Say, no, it's disgusting, it's terrible, or your husband will catch us, it's not worth it. So he says, this is why you have to use Hashkafa Gedola. He says, a person has to approach all of their spiritual actions, struggles, in a big way and not in a little way. Then you can succeed. He says, if you would try to talk to Eshes Potiphar with simple, this worldly things, then you're caught up in the arena of the Yetzer Hara, and he's always going to win. If you get into the ring with the Yetzer Hara, he says, no, it's a terrible sin. She says, okay. Like Rashi said, Lishkavima, we won't do any bad maisa, just come, right? Let's stay near me, come to bed, right, etc., without doing anything wrong, right? He had to rise up above Hashkafa Gedola, saying, we are entirely different creatures. We live on an entirely different wavelength, right? I'm a person of Nevuah. I'm a person of Avodah, of Korbanos, and all these things. This was talking not so much to her, but to him. But it was transmitting to her that there's no chance to you convincing me with this. It's not that we're going to go back and forth with a ping pong of maybe yes, maybe no. I'm above this game. I'm out of it, right? There's nothing there because everything I'm involved with is so big. This is Hashkafa Gedola. There's no little things. You don't see little things. He ties into it, the fascinating Chazal. It says in the Gemara Menachos, Ashirim kamtsonim. Rich people are stingy. He says, why is that? It seems counterintuitive. You would think a rich person can spend freely, and the poor person has to really count out each penny. He says, but you know how the rich person got rich? He knew a certain secret. Pruta lepruta mitztaref. 1 penny and another penny is 2 pennies. He never looked at 1 penny. The poor person looks, what's an extra penny, right? I went to the store. Oh, there's more expensive than the store across the street. I'm not going to go across the street, for another half shekel. I'll buy it here. Why? Because half shekel here, half shekel there, I'm still going to be a poor schlepper. He says, He says, a half a shekel and another half shekel is a shekel. And that can join up with another one and join up with another one. There's nothing small, right? If you're thinking big and you're seeing things big, it's there. And I've met such people. I've definitely met such people who haven't. Okay, so this is one aspect as to how he rose up above him, and it's this idea of gadlus. Okay, in many ways, it's like the gadlus ha'adam, right? That was supposed to be the banner in Slobodka, but it's a basic Jewish concept. A Jew is a huge person. Rav Wolbe once asked, he says, sometimes people think that the Yetzer Hara kind of, retired. He got a little bit, because not long ago, a Jew in the Soviet Union wanted to put on tefillin, he'd find himself in the Gulag or in Siberia. Now you have Lubavitchers putting tefillin on people in front of the Kremlin, right? He says, right, it used to be so hard to work in this profession or that profession as a frum Jew. There used to be nothing to eat. Now, they've conquered every snack food aside from pork rinds, and they'll probably work on that also somehow, and all these things. Why is the Yetzer Hara letting it be so easy to do mitzvahs in certain ways? So he said, Yetzer is taking another tack. He's convincing us that we're this small. He's letting you do the mitzvahs, but he says, your mitzvahs really don't mean much, right? That, when he makes you small, when he makes you tiny, that's when you can lose it, or you can do that Aveira because it doesn't really make much difference. And this is something we have to very much avoid. The son-in-law of the Alter of Slobodka was Vayeishev. Vayeishev, when the Alter went to Eretz Yisrael, when the yeshiva went to Hebron, he continued running the yeshiva. He made it out to Eretz Yisrael. He founded the Slobodka Yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Now, one interesting chapter in his life, I read in a biography of someone named Dr. Joseph Kamenetsky. He was the head of Torah Masorah in America, the Association of Day Schools. And he said that Rabbi Isaac Sher came to America to raise money. Now, in those days, when a Rosh Yeshiva came to raise money, the trip was so long and so expensive, they would often stay for half a year, sometimes 2 years, right, in America or something, trying to make enough to make the trip worthwhile. So they got, for Rabbi Isaac Sher, he'd got this tiny little room in the Lower East Side, right, which he slept there. That was, so to speak, the office. And there was a new yeshiva kind of that had started up, Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, didn't even have the name Yeshiva University then. And there were a group of boys, there was a small amount of students, a group of boys heard that a big gadol from Europe came. So they asked him, would you learn with us once a week? Could we come? You'll give a vad, what they call in the yeshivas. You'll learn with us once a week. And he did. Now, fascinatingly, from that group, a bunch of the young men were inspired to go back to Europe and to learn in the great yeshivas in Eastern Europe pre-war. Among that group was somebody named Nosson Wachtvogel, who became the Mashgiach of Lakewood, was a young boy named Victor Miller, who became the famous Rabbi Victor Miller. There was a Rabbi Davis who ended up having a yeshiva in Mountaindale, New York. I think Rav Gifter, Mordechai Gifter was there. He ended up going to Telz. And at the time when I read it, this Dr. Joseph Kamenetsky said he also wanted to go, just one of his parents was sick and he couldn't. So I thought, it would be interesting. I would imagine that if they reviewed Rabbi Isaac Sher's life with him, and he was going over what he did and what he accomplished in the yeshivas and this, the idea that, he said a little once a week shir on the Parsha, whatever, to a group of young American boys would be this little kind of small footnote. And it would be amazing to realize, hey, that little small footnote actually did so much, and he would be so surprised. But then I thought, no, I don't think he would be surprised at all. Because I think the reason he had that effect on them was because he believed in their potential for greatness. And he believed in the importance of learning Torah with them. And that, when you see something, the greatness of it, and you teach people in that way, then that makes it happen. Then they were able to see themselves as great, see themselves as potential Talmidei Chachamim, see themselves as potential tzaddikim. It wasn't an easy thing to make that journey to go. Somehow he inspired that, and he saw that in them, and he was doing it. And that was really his whole approach. I saw in another sefer this really cute little incident with him. They said the boy in his yeshiva came over to him one morning after Shachar. He says, Rebbe, I get a mazel tov. He says, what's the mazel tov? I became a chassan last night. He said, why? And the boy was like, he said, everybody gets married. I said, that's a very bad answer. He says, what does it mean to build a Jewish home? What does it mean to find your wife and you have to think about what big thing you're doing, right? It's always supposed to be big. That's the idea of Hashkafa Gedola, and that's the idea that saved Yosef. It's interesting. I've been listening to some of the sessions from this year's Aguda convention. They always have it over Thanksgiving weekend. So I was listening to one on Kashrus, Rabbi Fishbane and Rabbi Center. So again, I was kind of doing stuff while I was listening, so I was half listening, half not. And there was a question that came up. They referred to a question that came up already in the time, I think even of the Rishonim, of is it a problem for a woman to get a non-Jewish woman to nurse her baby? So some people said, well, it's clear from Moshe Rabbeinu. You see, Miriam went, and she did the whole thing of telling Bas Paro, wait, I'm going to get a Jewish menekes, and the Medrash says Moshe didn't want to nurse from a non-Jewish woman. But other Rishonim disagree, and part of their svara is, okay, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was born, the house filled with light. Moshe Rabbeinu was going to be a Navi, right, who was going to give over the Torah to Eretz Yisrael. We're talking here about regular people. Okay, again, we're not talking a pikuach nefesh situation also, that the child is in danger. So, that seems to be a very good svara, but I think they quoted it, Rav Mordechai Gross of Bnei Brak. He said, you know what? He said, the reason this could relate to all of us is because there's a pasuk in Sefer Yoel, I didn't get a chance to look it up, that said that eventually all of Am Yisrael will be Nevi'im. Meaning, we're supposed to look at ourselves as potential Nevi'im. Right? We're not just supposed to say, oh, the mouth of Moshe Rabbeinu was so holy, he was going to say Nevuah, so he has to take very special care of me, my mouth, what difference does it make? He says, you got to realize, you have potential Nevuah in you. That is who and what you are. Now, I always end up referencing something. I feel it's very important, even though it sounds like it comes from a strange and silly source. I was once listening on the radio here, they interviewed someone who did his PhD thesis on the connection of Jews to the development of superhero comic books, especially focusing on Superman, which was the first classic one, which was written by two Jewish fellows who came from Eastern Europe. I actually met one of the grandchildren of one of them. And what was fascinating, he said, is that the Nazis, even before the beginning of the war, they outlawed Superman comics in Germany. They said it was a Jewish comic. And he said he doesn't think it was just because Jews wrote it, but he said the themes in there, if we just do a quick chazar on Superman for those who aren't fresh on it, whether they did it intentionally or not, right? It's supposed to be that he was a baby from another planet who was put in a little spaceship before that planet was destroyed, came to Earth, where he ended up in Iowa or something like that, looking like everybody else, growing up with this father, but actually having these tremendous powers inside of him that he discovers and he's supposed to use for good over evil and to help people, etc. He says that really is the picture of the Jew, meaning that you may look small, and the world may look at you as small and insignificant, but you know inside that you're entirely different. You come from a different place. You have tremendous powers, and you're supposed to use those powers for good. And they added in another chap. Part of the story is that there's a material, this green rock called kryptonite, that if Superman comes into contact with kryptonite, he loses all of his powers and he becomes just like anyone else. So Jews also have a concept of averas, of things that we must keep our distance from. Otherwise, that impairs our powers. That shrinks us from who we are and who we're supposed to be. It was a fascinating thing. And that is what Yosef remembered. In other words, Svarim point out he had all the reasons to just turn his back on everything. His own brother sold him. He was sold into slavery. The Medrash says that until Am Yisrael came out of Yetzias Mitzrayim, no slaves left slavery in Egypt. Right? That just didn't exist. You were a slave forever. Right? But nonetheless, he remembered who he was. As he says to his brothers when he meets them, Ani Yosef, Bichai. Ani Yosef. I'm the same Yosef. I didn't forget who I am. So That's a big key, and that's a big key when it came to Chanukah as well. Okay, when it comes to the idea of lashkicham terasecha, that the Yevonim didn't come, right, to really forbid the study of Torah. Okay, at the end in the Gezeres of Antiochus maybe, but in general they didn't come that. They came to get them to forget the Torah. Now the question: how do you get someone to forget anything? If I just did something outrageous, I said, "Everybody here, please forget that." Not going to work. In fact, they'll remember it even more because I told them not to forget it. It's like the famous, nobody think about a pink elephant, everybody thinks about a pink elephant. The way you get someone to forget something is by making it insignificant, by making it irrelevant, right? The idea is that your Torah doesn't make you great at all. Your Torah is outdated, it's foolish, it doesn't bring you to the achievements that we, the Greeks, brought. Right? You have to just realize it's not something worth looking at and holding on to. Lashkicham torasecha, right? We say in Alanisim. They tried to get us to forget your Torah, meaning to remember that the Torah is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself gave us. The word Anochi, says in the Zohar Kadosh, stands for Ana Nafshi Kosvis Yehovis. Hashem says, I took my nefesh, so to speak, I wrote it down and I gave it to you. That's the Torah. That's why it's called Torah Secha. They say, yeah, you have a book of folklore of the wisdom of your elders. Very nice. Put it on the shelf next to all the other ones that are in there. That's Lashkicham Torah Secha. Right? To remember that who we are and what we had. When they said, Ein lachem chelik be'elokei Yisrael, they said every Jew had to write, right? Ein lanu chelik be'elokei Yisrael means, let's get real. You're saying that we are connected to the creator of the whole universe, right? When I talk and say bracha, he's listening. When I do that, and they shrink and they shrink and they shrink us, which is there. It's also was a battle of beauty, right? And they say that's why also Yosef was described of having beauty, and they said Potiphar. These Parshas always come out at the time of Greece. Greece was all about beauty. Right, and creating this image of the ultimate beauty. And when you can make something look ugly in another person's eyes, so also they want to forget about it. They disassociate from it. This really was what happened at different times. During the time of the Haskalah and such, the idea of the frum Jew was turned into this caricature of something shameful, something outmoded, right? Something that just doesn't understand, isn't with it, is never going to get anywhere. And that was another example of the time of forgetting. So it says that, and Rashi brings down, there were two shittas in Chazal when it said that he came to the house Lasos Melachto. On that day of this ultimate test with Eshes Potiphar, he came to the house to do his work. So one shitta is that he was going to give in. She had attacked every night. It says in the Medrash that she changed outfits, I think, twice a day. Right, more than in a Pesach hotel, it was like, always, all these things. And he was going to give in. But then he saw Dmus Yokno Shel Yaakov Avinu. He saw the image of Yaakov Avinu. Now, people mistakenly try to understand that as what's called Jewish guilt. Right? Anybody who's out there in the field knows that Jewish guilt has not stopped assimilation and intermarriage. It's not. With Yosef, it wasn't Jewish guilt. Yaakov Avinu represents the midah of Tiferes, of beauty. Meaning, he saw a beauty and a grandeur that outshone that of Eshes Potiphar. And he knew that he was going to lose that if he went with her. Right? This is another form of that gadlus and of that beauty. To see it, to have this seer. And Rav Dessler says a fascinating thing from the Alter of Kelm. The Alter of Kelm spoke a lot about imagination and the use of the imagination and how important it was. So important that he says that he feels that really is what divides between a tzaddik and a rasha. It's fascinating. He writes when he spoke to his Talmidim about this, he said, I've revealed to you a great sod gadol, hatamun etzli zeh kama, which was hidden with me for a long time, meaning the power of the imagination. Yoresi legalos lachem, I was afraid to reveal it to you, pen chas v'sholom lo tishtamshu b'zeh hakoach, that I'm afraid that once I reveal it to you, if you don't utilize it, right, then in trufa you'll be held accountable once I reveal to you the tremendous power of imagination if you're not going to use it. Okay, so the idea of images and building these images is so key. Rav Dessler brings from the Alter of Kelm a fascinating thing about what he calls Rishon and Achron in these things. He says that the first tziyurim, right, the first images you have in your mind are the ones that are lodged in there, and it's very hard to dislodge. Okay, this is famous. Even right, the Chavetz Chaim brings such a thing in Lashon Hara. That once a person has heard slander about someone, it's very hard to dislodge it afterwards. Right, the famous, the press conference. Senator, have you stopped beating your wife? He said, I never beat my wife. Senator denies wife beating. Suddenly, everybody sees the senator as the wife beater because that's the image. And then go try to explain not. Okay, so he says the same thing. If you have images of beauty, of Kedusha in your mind, so then it's hard for the other images to dislodge them. If you've built a beautiful internal world of these things. But if the other images take hold and you try to kind of displace them with images of Kedusha, it's an uphill battle, right? Like in a war, people who have the high ground always have a much more advantageous position in the battle because you have to try to fight uphill to get them off. It's very difficult. Okay, so he says this is what a person has to do. You have to be maktim tziyurei de Kedusha. You have to have images in your mind. And he says this has to come from da'as. It's not just kind of fluffy imagination. It means take the things you know and that you learn and then really focus on seeing them, on experiencing them, and then storing them. So this is part of what we do on Chanukah. Number one is that no Jew on Chanukah can feel small because, as we said, the Ran says, Haneres Alo Kodeshem, any Jew who lights their menorah, any Jew, doesn't matter how observant he is, how knowledgeable he is or not, those Neres are Kodesh. Right? I come by, I want to light up a cigarette on some menorah there. Somebody says, hey, that's a Chanukah menorah. I said, yeah, but look at that guy who lit it. Right? He doesn't know Aleph Beis from Torah and Mitzvahs. Haneres Alo Kodeshem. They always are. Right? You have that inside of you, and that's the time that every Jew sees it, and that we're supposed to see it in every Jew. And therefore, right, that's something that we're supposed to be looking at. Right? It's a very strange aspect of the mitzvah that one of the things you can make a bracha on Ner Chanukah is actually seeing it. Gemara says that if a person does not have the ability to light Ner Chanukah for whatever reason, and he sees another Jew's Ner Chanukah, so he can't make the bracha lahadlik, that he's not lighting, but he can make the bracha on seeing it. She'asa nisim lavasenu ba'yom imahim azman hazeh. Right? And shechianu, right, for the first night. So he says, Elalir osam bilvad. It's not just saying all you can do is see them. You're supposed to see them. Now, I've always wondered, it says in the Sfarim, right, very early Sfarim brings down this idea of trying to stay by the Neres for half an hour and to look at the Neres. There were tzaddikim who looked at the Neres for hours and hours. And to be honest, like I've sat there, looked at the Neres, there they are, they're burning. So I try to learn by the Neres, which is also a good thing. But if we thought of what we see there, if we thought we're looking at these Haneres Halal Kodeshim, we're really seeing ourselves. It's a very special mirror because where did that Kedusha of the Neres come from? It came from within you. It came from the connection of the Torah that you have. And Ner Chanukah is special because, again, it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's a mitzvah the Chachamim made. And Davka there, the Gemara asked the question, than on the other 7 mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. It says, how in the world can you say, Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvah v'etzivonu l'hadlik ner, right, Baruch Atah Hashem, that you commanded us with your mitzvahs to light the Ner of Chanukah. You flip through the Torah, is that in there? It can't be in there, right? Chanukah happened so long afterwards. So they say, no, there's a power in the Chachamim. Zekenecha v'yomrulach, sha'alavicha v'yagedcha. The Chachamim were imbued with that power to create that mitzvah. And now when you do that mitzvah, that's because you're also from those people that have such a power in there. And when you look at those neros, you can see who you are. Remember who you are. The opposite of lashkicham, right? The Sfasema says that nakama always means to get yours back plus. They wanted to make us forget the Torah, so we're going to davka remember. We're going to remember the Torah. We're going to remember what it is that it's Torah Secha. We're going to remember who we are, and that is what we see in those neros. So hopefully, by Yom Ma'im Bazman Hazeh, we should see victory in all ways, on all fronts, and we should see Yeshua's Gedolas Bazman Hazeh as well.